anytime
Mm.
you struggle with overachieving, people pleasing, poor boundary setting, perfectionism, blame, control, any kind of addiction,
Yeah.
shame is running the show because you're participating in those behaviors in an effort to avoid shame because we're so worried about how we're perceived by other people, which is a normal human process, by the way. The goal is
Yeah.
to not care. It is not to not care, but we care so much about our how we're perceived by other people. We allow shame to drive the bus of our life. So
Yeah.
whether you know it or not, shame's driving. And so, what can be helpful is for people to understand what the behaviors are that are elicitors of shame so that you can also spot these behaviors that don't make you feel good. Because at the
Yeah.
end of the day, people listening to your show, they want to be better. They want to lean
Yeah.
into their values, right? And like people pleasing and poor boundaries are not on your values, ma'am. Like
Yeah.
perfectionism is not on your values. So that is my entry point to talking about shame.
Welcome back to the Dana Grant Show, where we have a queen in the house today, Andrea Owens. Let's just take a pause here. Not only three-time bestsellers, but I read her book back in 2013, which was 52 Ways. I always say your kick-ass life, but it's 52 ways to live a kick-ass life. And she just re-released it 2 months ago, along with a download audio, which is like for all the people that say, I don't read, now you can listen to it. She also makes some noise, How to Stop Feeling Like Shit. These are my favorite books. She is my favorite human. Welcome her.
Um,
Welcome you. You goddesses in the house. If I had
Thank you
drums,
so much.
I'd be
What a
like,
beautiful welcome. I can't wait to have this conversation.
oh yeah, we've been waiting. Hey, we've been waiting to do this for a
Months.
while,
Yeah.
months. And
It,
I was just like, oh, don't cancel that. She's not going to reschedule if I do this. And they thought I could tape it in Florida last week. And I'm like, yeah,
no.
no,
No,
no, I can't do that. Of course,
I'm
I
glad we
don't know,
waited.
the
We're
ocean
here.
would have
We're
been cold.
ready.
Yeah. All right. Hey, you know what? I have so many notes. We just went over everything. And it's like, I just want to have this heart center conversation with you about your life, the things you love, the things that move you, the journey you've been on, because you share a lot,
I
and
do.
I'm gonna just dive right in because your books, I think, they've always spoken to me. They're written in a
Mhm.
way with such clarity and depth. Everything about you is like you go deep, and
I
you
do.
you go into deep waters, even though you said, you don't like to dive into those deep emotions. You don't like to stay there. But you
Mhm.
also said, and this really spoke to me, and everyone can see my notes here, but this, I had to write this out. The four holy emotions. Maybe we can start there. The four
Yeah.
holy emotions of grief, terror, rage, shame. And you said it's the portal to your power. And
Mhm.
man, there's something about that screamed at me. And I think everyone I deal with, this is big. Let's go there.
Yeah, it is, and I do love starting in the deep end. I came to realize, well, let me back up a little bit more. Like, as a
Yeah.
representative of Generation X, I did not grow
Yeah.
up in a family where we talked about any emotions, let alone I call them the four holy emotions. And so, but also looking back, the youngest of five children,
Hmm.
happy childhood, very loving home, but also a kind of the quintessential, we don't talk about feelings. We don't talk about elephants in the room. If you have any other feeling
Mm.
besides happiness, please go do that in your room on your own and come out when you're done. And
Mm.
this is no fault to my parents. Like they were
Yeah.
great in so many other ways, but our parents didn't have a whole lot of emotional literacy, let alone emotional intelligence, right?
Right.
So I, like many others, grew up to find feelings inconvenient at best and horrible at their worst. And so I have a larger than life personality. So it was
Yeah.
easy for me to create humor instead of dealing with
Mm.
emotions, to push them away. The one thing I had
Mm.
easy access to was anger. So I was very reactive, in my teens and in my 20s, especially in my romantic relationship that I was in for a long time. And then in my early 30s, I started to realize that maybe my life totally exploded. My therapist had been saying for years, like, maybe you're codependent, maybe you have an eating disorder, maybe. And I was like, no, I just want to come and complain about all the people in my life in our therapy sessions. Like, I don't want you to tell me how I could change. Like, I'm not ready to take any accountability. Like, let's talk about how terrible my boyfriend is.
Yeah.
So finally, around my early 30s, I started to listen to my therapist and think like maybe she's onto something. And my life completely exploded for the first time. It's happened multiple times. And that's when I really dove into personal growth. And one of the side effects of that was starting to heal from codependency, starting to heal from my love addiction and uh, eating disorder. And around that same time, my alcohol consumption picked up speed because I'm like, I'm just going to trade in one
Mm.
for the other. Didn't know that was what I was doing at the time. And
Yeah.
so when I was 37, this was in 2011, I got sober from alcohol. That's really when I was going to say when shit hit the fan, for the sake of sounding dramatic, it kind of did because that was when it forced me to feel my feelings, Dana, like
Yeah.
honestly. And I was like, I don't want any part of that. But I realized looking back at my life, one of the reasons I had such a hard time in any of my relationships was because I found other people's feelings inconvenient. And the reason is because I could not be with my own. I couldn't be
Mm.
with my own, so I certainly cannot be with yours. And
Right.
so even just that example was something that was something so uncomfortable to start to work through, but also intuitively, I knew that this was going to be one of the ways I accessed the best version of myself and then the best version of my life. I wished it was a different way, and I went kicking and screaming in. And so all these years later, as we're recording this, I'm going to be 50 in 6 days. I recorded a podcast episode called The Four Holy Emotions because in my personal life and in my private practice, I work with a lot of high achieving women in leadership. There are four emotions that they struggle with the most. Struggle with most
Yeah.
of them, but shame, terror, which is different from fear.
Well, I
It's
wrote
a
it
level
down.
up.
I'm like, let's write
Terror,
it down and circle it in pink because it's like,
grief, and
yeah,
rage
yeah,
and a lot of them they're like siblings. They're like four siblings because there's a lot of
yeah,
overlap between them. Those are the toughest. And those for me in my personal life, when I surrendered to those, have
yeah.
truly been the portal to my own personal power in the form of my own personal evolution and growth.
Wow.
Mhm.
That not only speaks to me, and I'm sure it's speaking to a lot of other people. You first, you said 2011, and I was thinking back. 2011 is when you were on my radar.
Oh,
And
you're
then,
kidding. Okay, yeah.
yeah, and I remember that time. So I've
Hmm.
watched your evolution, and I've watched how transparent you've been with anxiety and
Yeah,
claiming it and using humor through it, which is really fun.
I
It is
have
very
to.
funny, but also how well you cope and how well you share the dark, we can call it the dark night of the soul, but that this life is real. There is,
Yeah.
we can write best-selling books and have 10 million downloads on our podcasts, but we still feel what we need to feel, and there's no way out but in. Tell me more about, and happy birthday, by the way, because I
Oh,
know you
thank
have a
you.
birthday coming up. Yeah, all that fire, all that Aries. But, with the grief, the terror, the rage, and the shame, when people are holding that, and I think about my life and how difficult and how unexpected they can come back up.
Mhm.
I think the rage is under control. The terror, still can come up. The grief can be all consuming at times. But the shame, I think, for a lot of people, it just keeps rerouting through. How can
Mhm.
you talk about that and how women, especially high achieving women, that can be very secretive about all of this and then
Yeah.
overachieve and then shift, like you said, one thing shifts from the next and they may
Mhm.
recognize it, they may not.
Yeah.
How can they deal with that?
The way I like to talk about shame is exactly how you set the question up is what's interesting too is that in 2009 I was interested in the work of Brene Brown. And back then, this was before podcasts were big. She had a read
Yeah.
along on her blog where she would post MP3 recordings where I would
Yeah.
download them to my iPod and
God, I
then go
love
on
that.
walks with my then
Yeah.
babies, who are
Oh,
now
I
older
love
teenagers.
that. Yeah.
But I was interested because she had gotten sober and she was in academia. She had her PhD. So I was interested in that. So then when she rolled out, and for those that don't know who she is, she's a shame researcher who initially set out to research human connection.
Yeah.
And then shame kind of overtook her work. And so that's what she's known for. She rolled out a training and certification for therapists and coaches in 2014. I was one of the first cohorts to get certified. And it wasn't lost on me that there I was, fairly newly sober. And if you would have asked me 10 years prior, like, what do you think about working with people around shame resilience? I would have been like, get out using four-letter words and laughing my ass off. But there
Yeah.
I was. I took my happy ass to San Antonio, Texas to go get trained and go through the methodology, which was excruciating. But here's a few years
Yeah.
later, and this is what was the genesis of how to stop feeling like shit, is because especially my demographic is largely women. And when I talk to them, they'll say things like, I don't really walk around feeling ashamed. So what's that about? So anytime
Mm.
you struggle with overachieving, people pleasing, poor boundary setting, perfectionism, blame, control, any kind of addiction,
Yeah.
shame is running the show because you're participating in those behaviors in an effort to avoid shame because we're so worried about what how we're perceived by other people, which is a normal human process, by the way. The goal is
Yeah.
to not care. It is not to not care, but we care so much about our how we're perceived by other people. We allow shame to drive the bus of our life. So
Yeah.
whether you know it or not, shame's driving. And so, what can be helpful is for people to understand what the behaviors are that are elicitors of shame so that you can also spot these behaviors that don't make you feel good. Because at the
Yeah.
end of the day, people listening to your show, they want to be better. They want to lean into
Yeah.
their values, right? And like people pleasing and poor boundaries are not on your values, ma'am. You know, like
Yeah.
perfectionism is not on your values. So that is my entry point to talking about shame.
I love that because I think that we all, to some degree, carry around shame. And
Yeah.
I not only witness it everywhere, I witness it because it mirrors back at the level and degree that I am willing to accept and carry I mean, let's face it, if we dedicate our lives to this work, it's a lifetime dedication. It's like a
Yep.
never one and done. We're not like ever to a point where we're like, oh my God, it's good. I'm good. I've arrived. It's everything has come. It just all of a sudden then it epically falls apart. And then we're right back to like we pick
Exactly.
up those pieces and say, okay, this is what I'm going to address now.
Hmm.
Um, you're right. People that are listening to this are probably, and I hope you have your pen and paper out, people, take notes. If they're dealing with anxiety, and I think that the culture and where we living when these times that we're living in now, people are more anxious. They're,
Yeah.
they're more worried. I've never been a worrier or an anxious person, but I'm witnessing an enormous amount of people gathering, circumstance. What can you say for the people that are gathering the more anxiety, and how can they put it down? Because you suffered for a long time with
Yeah.
anxiety and you found a methodology, you found, well, ketamine. Let's talk a little bit about that and how that helped
Yeah.
and what people, just some tools people can drop into and utilize because anxiety is real. I mean, I'm not an anxious
Yeah.
person, but I have felt anxiety lately
Yeah.
over what is going on.
Yeah, it's wild out there, and it's just so much uncertainty. I mean,
Yeah.
that's really
So much
the root
uncertainty.
of anxiety is the unknown. And I mean, we could have an entire hour and a half of this, but I'll try to generalize and give people
Yeah.
some takeaways. Is that first of all, to have worry is to be human. You know, like
Right.
we're constantly trying to predict the future, and it's always uncertain. So that's fun. And
Yeah.
also we're basing our predictions on past history, and it's usually past history that wasn't great. It's like
Yeah.
we don't tend to be like, oh, you know what's going to happen in the future? All of the great things that have happened to me in the past. Sometimes we do, but that comes with a lot of work, and I'm an optimistic person by nature. I have a cheerful disposition, and still, it was just part of my DNA. Thanks, Dad, to really struggle with anxiety, and I
Yeah.
say that because in my 20s, in the 90s. I was having panic attacks and severe anxiety to the point where I was throwing up. My arms and fingers were going numb. I didn't know what was going on, and I very much pushed back on any kind of diagnosis like that. And so it took a lot for me to really bring me to my knees to go to the doctor. And so you
Yeah.
asked about solutions, and for some it's medication. Medication changed my life. I started taking it reluctantly, and then picked my head up one day and was like, oh, is this how normal people react to
Yeah.
situations? Like it was life changing. So fast forward, I got pregnant with my first child, and then went off meds, and then had done enough work. Cognitive behavioral therapy can be
Right.
excellent for people, whether you do that with a therapist or some other resource. But there are lots of different remedies, and I got to a point. You mentioned ketamine. This was decades into my
Yeah.
own. I had been through so much talk therapy. All of it was helpful. The
Yeah.
CBD, the medication, all of it moved the needle somewhat. And I got to a point in my life in 2020. I
Yeah.
had in my first marriage, I'd been with this person since I was 17. I was 30 years old. We were married at that point. We were talking about starting a family, and he had an affair with our neighbor and got our neighbor pregnant. And so we divorced. He ended up having a baby with her. They didn't work out, but I was devastated. And I picked myself up. I moved on. I got remarried. I had two children, started a business, had a successful career. But that trauma that happened to me, that was
Yeah.
such a profoundly humiliating experience. It was such a profoundly um, traumatic experience that involved so much grief.
Yeah.
I told my therapist in 2020, it was a new therapist, and I said, I feel like I need an exorcism. I know
Ooh.
I don't want to be with this man. Like I know this, but
Right.
why can't I land the plane? I would still have dreams about it. I felt like it kept showing up, and I would get triggered in my marriage, and I was like,
Right.
I need an exorcism. I need you to scoop out whatever part of my brain that is stuck. I felt like it was stuck. So then I started hearing about the resurgence of psychedelics in
Yeah.
terms of therapy, not just recreationally, because I did mushrooms
Yeah.
in the 90s, and always had a good time. But I started paying attention to the research
Hmm.
and various psychedelics, magic mushrooms, LSD, MDMA, and ketamine. And after doing my research, and as someone in long-term recovery, where it's kind of frowned upon to do drugs, essentially. So
Yeah.
I had to be
Yeah.
very intentional about it, and
Yeah.
kind of careful. So I talked to other people in long-term recovery, and decided that I would try ketamine from a therapeutic standpoint. It's like, no, I'm not going to like Jake with a neck tattoo behind a Best Buy to like
Yeah.
buy something. I went through a doctor, through a company called Mind Bloom, which I still work with them, and they're amazing.
Yeah. I saw
And
that.
I did 12 rounds last year, and I'm actually next week going to start six additional rounds. And I'll tell you, I think this might be helpful for the listeners, because people always want to know, like, what's it like, and what were your
Yeah.
main takeaways?
I have a lot of people that
Yeah.
have, questioned and said, would this be helpful? And because I hadn't experienced it, I said, I don't know, but it's interesting to me.
The
Something I
the
may try. Who
The
knows?
thing I knew, Dana, honestly, was I knew that I could not solve this problem with my conscious mind. I knew that there was something going on in my subconscious. Because
There we
whatever was
go.
triggering me, I would fly off the handle about things. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I know logically that I'm safe. But why? So it's my nervous system. And
Yeah.
another thing, the way I would describe it to my therapist is, I said, I feel like the motherboard is fried. And
Mm.
so my metaphor was pointing to my subconscious. And that's what psychedelic therapy does. It gets into parts of your brain, and it literally rewires neural pathways. And I hosted a retreat in Asheville for a group of women, and the person that I had hired as a private chef had done ketamine therapy. And she talked to me.
Mm.
I got up really early one morning. She was there making breakfast before everybody else was up. And I talked to her about it. And so I was sold. So I
Yeah.
one a couple of the 12 sessions, basically it's tablets that you put in your mouth. And you can go to clinics where it's done intravenously, but with Mind Bloom, it's tablets, they dissolve in your mouth and then you spit them out and you put a sleep mask on and then you have a psychedelic experience for about 40 minutes and then you come out of it and you're totally fine, not groggy or anything.
Were you frightened
Which
at all? I mean,
like,
somehow
huh?
that frightens me. Somehow
It's
losing control. When you
it's not
said that,
like
I
that.
think back on my 20s of panic and anxiety attacks, and we've had similar journeys, including our birth lineup. It's crazy listening to you, and I'm like, uh-huh.
It's different. It
Yeah.
felt very different than like being drunk or even
Mm,
on mushrooms. And because you have the mask on the whole time, I felt like the images and things that I saw, this is why I chose ketamine because for me it felt like a good first step, like a baby step
right.
into psychedelic therapy.
Oh,
And
okay.
so I'll give you a quick example of something that I saw in one of my sessions is I had a very clear visualization. I had lots of different visualizations. It's kind of like dreaming. And
Mm,
so, when you wake up from a sleep and you had dreams and they're really
yeah.
weird, you're like, Abraham Lincoln was there. And then
Yeah.
there was my mom and she was making chili, like,
Oh,
well, that's sort of what
so
ketamine
it's not
does.
like taking marijuana. Like I did. I always tell my children, I took a marijuana stick once. They said, "Mom, it's a joint," and I'm like, "Well, whatever that stick thing was." And I said, "I think it had PCP or some drug in it because I could feel my blood pumping through my body," and I freaked
Yeah.
out and had the ambulance called. And I said, and so I always think of a new experience. Our subconscious. I connect it to the unknown of like it was should have been a harmless little marijuana
Yeah.
stick.
That sounds a little different. That sounds more just
Yeah.
like you become more aware of your body in that
Yeah.
moment, which can happen during these sessions. But ketamine for me was different in that I saw similar visualizations like I would in a dream when I was sleeping, but you're awake. And
Right.
so in one, I saw a vision of my 30-year-old self. And so I was 30
Mm.
when my first marriage ended. And then also, she was carrying my 17-year-old self. And so when I met my
Oh.
first husband, I was 17. And something really difficult happened when I first met him when I was 17. And in that moment, in that hallucination, I realized, oh my God, that whole relationship was bookended by two traumatic events. I never realized that
Mm.
before. And then in this visualization, I was able to talk to both of them. And my 30-year-old self was so exhausted in this vision
Mm.
that I had. And my 17-year-old self was so full of rage that she couldn't
Mm.
even walk anymore. And I still get
Wow.
emotional when I tell this story.
Well, I can feel
in
it.
in my
It's
dream or
visceral, yeah.
in my session, my present day self, my 49-year-old self, was able to talk to both of them like I would my own teenage daughter and hold their faces and say, you don't have to carry this anymore. Like you have grieved enough. And what I came out of that, my takeaway, what I came out of that realizing was that if anyone's familiar with internal family systems, it's called parts work,
Mhm.
where parts during traumatic events throughout our life, whether they're big traumas or even small traumas, we sort of exile parts of ourselves and they get kind of stuck and frozen. So in my case, my 30-year-old self, who was so completely traumatized and even like dissociated the moment I found out that he had been having an affair for all those months, and my 17-year-old self that was also so traumatized, sort of froze emotionally in my subconscious. And they were constantly looking for a different outcome,
Right.
not not able to understand that the relationship was over. We are done. We have moved on. It was
They're
stuck,
still
desperate for a different outcome.
right.
For closure, really. And like that's
Right.
kind of like when you say like I never got any closure, like that's what it is. There was these younger versions of myself who were kind of confused. Like
Yeah.
what where did we go? And they stayed stuck and just that's that feeling of like I wasn't able to land the plane that I kept telling my
Right.
therapist. That's what that was. So I have never cried so hard in my life. Fetal position in my
Mm.
bed during that session. And when I came out of it, I don't even know how many pages I journaled, and I don't even recognize my handwriting from that journaling
Mm.
session. And essentially, I wrote from my 17-year-old self and from my 30-year-old self. And it was as if I was able to finally help them see and hear and understand and accept that that chapter of our life is over and they're never going to get a different outcome that they wanted. And that that was going to have to be okay. And that we're safe, even though it is what it is. And so it was profound. It was so profound. And I have a couple other examples of things that I saw that have to do with my family of origin that were similar,
Right.
where I was able to heal from it and connect some dots too. And so again, I say this because ketamine therapy isn't for everyone.
Right.
And it can help a lot, or maybe it can help a little. I can't guarantee that for everyone. For me personally, it was one of the modalities that moved the needle a lot. So
Right.
for me, getting sober was another example of moving the needle a lot.
Right.
Ketamine therapy, the same. So that was my
So
long-winded explanation.
no, it was so informative, and I think a lot of people can relate. What dropped in for me was, how many people do you think, or women, think they have a trauma bond that can't be broken due to a core wound, that may just need to revisit? Like you said, I can't land the plane. I keep revisiting a different outcome. It may not be this big core trauma bond, but something that just needs a different shift in outcome. What do you think
Yeah.
about that? And I know
Yeah. And
you're
I
big
think
on
that,
EMDR. And what do you think about
yeah.
moving people through that,
Yeah,
movement as
EMDR
well?
was helpful for me too. And I worked on that same topic and it helped a
Yeah.
little bit, but that's when, I did that around 2015-ish and
Yeah.
some years went by and I had tried so many different things. And like, that's kind of where I said, like, I feel like I need an exorcism. And I think that it might be helpful for people to think about if you have a trauma and you think about how old you were when that happened, or if it was something that happened over time, that range of age, could it be, and maybe even like do a Google search for a quick explanation of what internal family systems is,
Hmm.
and like, could you see that maybe when that trauma happened to you, that part of you was sort of exiled? And what I mean by exiled is that it's as if it gets kind of like tucked away in your subconscious and it becomes a protector.
Hmm.
It takes on the job of being your protector, and it continues to try to show up for you with really old, outdated tools.
Yeah.
So, so when we get triggered, sometimes we think that lashing out is the thing to do. Like that's your
Yeah.
exiled part that's trying to protect you from
Yeah.
having that outcome that you had when you got hurt before. So
Right.
it's one of those things that might be helpful to first kind of connect the dots and think about where in your life do you feel like either you can't land the plane about a
Yeah.
certain topic or a certain person, or both, or is there a version of you, a younger version of you, that desperately is searching for a different outcome based on something that happened in your past?
Right. Is it possible to move the needle if people don't revisit and heal their
Mhm.
trauma or their past? Is it possible for them to move that needle forward without the plane actually crashing and burning?
Yeah, well, it depends on what your definition of moving the needle is. Like to me, I look at it. My goal was to heal the part of me or the
Mm.
whole part of me, whatever it was, that still felt like. So I had a belief, like, let's just talk about like love and like romantic relationships. Still in the process of ending my second marriage and looking back on the choices that I've made in my romantic relationships over the years. I clearly attracted people who were mirrors to wounds that I had, that part of like that, like it's almost hilarious. Like, who's the person who's going to trigger me the most, even if I can't see it in the first 6 months or a year that we're together.
Yeah.
I'm only going to
Yeah.
see it in retrospect when we're divorcing. And I
Yeah.
found them and
Yeah.
and thought they were the right person for me. And at the end of
Yeah.
the day, they were perfect for me. They were perfect
Yeah.
for me to
Yeah.
be the biggest teachers of my life. I have
Yeah.
nothing but gratitude for both of my ex-husbands for holding up the mirror and
I'm holding.
saying,
Yeah.
look at yourself, Andrea. Look at all the
Yeah.
ways that you don't love yourself. Look at all the
Yeah.
ways that you don't show up for yourself. Look at all the ways that you abandon yourself. But
Yeah.
I blamed my partners for doing those things to me. You
Yeah.
don't love me the way that I need to be loved. You keep abandoning me. You keep disappointing me. When the whole time I was doing that to myself.
Yeah.
So and it's not to say, they got off scot-free. Like they had their own work to do. But
Sure.
it's real interesting. If you look at your romantic partners, like the things that you blame them for,
Yeah.
are those things that you're also not showing up for yourself as?
Yeah.
It might be.
Yeah. That took me years to get that one
Yeah,
and
me
not
too.
look
50
at
years,
the
actually.
enormity of the trauma and not, say it's all you and wonder, but knowing now that even with it, it doesn't make any of it okay. And it's in my book coming out, so it doesn't make any of it okay. But I wouldn't be here doing what I do. And I'm enormously grateful because it allowed me to connect to that core part of myself that needed healing, that needed attention. Otherwise, I would have just kept attracting it in a different version over, and I'm just too damn old to keep attracting it. It's like
Right.
enough already, enough,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And
100%.
I think we have to say that, and I put down a question here, at what's your life? I think you wrote it down. What's your life's purpose? You said not what you achieve, but something you become.
Yeah.
And talk about that. Our life purpose isn't something that we achieve, but something we become.
Yeah. I've never been, and I mean I might be in the minority here, but I've never been one to feel like, oh, I have to find my life purpose.
Yeah.
But I also never I was not the girl who knew what she wanted to do as a college major. Like I didn't even take the
Mm,
SATs. I was like, where's the keg party this weekend? That's the only information that I need. Like I was not I didn't have a really strong work. I was the youngest of five. My parents were like, good luck with life. Like I was very much like Cher from Clueless. Like the only direction I had was to the
yeah.
mall. So I've never also been really one to be sort
Oh
of
my
desperate
gosh.
to look for my life purpose.
Yeah.
And maybe it's because I'm lucky and privileged enough to get to do personal growth for a living. But I also don't think that motherhood is my life purpose. And I think that's great for people that feel fully fulfilled and complete that way. I think that at the end of the day, I think that as like just an umbrella terms, I think all humans are looking for three things. I think they're looking for the feeling of aliveness, like what is it that makes you feel alive? And sometimes we find that in very toxic behaviors with toxic people. We're looking for completion or wholeness. And also we're looking for just, and I'm just totally blanking on what the third thing is. I just created a body.
It's okay. It'll come in because
It'll
it's
come
like
to me.
how you live your
Perimenopause.
life
Thank you.
now. It's
It'll
relatively
come to
appropriate.
me. But
Yeah.
the whole it's my point around life purpose is that it's
Yeah.
not, I think, and it's kind of the American way to measure that by success
Yeah.
and marriage and the nuclear family and or our
Yeah.
salary and things like that. But
Yeah.
I also, before I finish my point, I have found, and I'm curious if you're the same way, is midlife will shake you by the shoulders and maybe slap you across the face a couple times because
Oh
for
yeah.
me, starting at around probably my mid 40s,
Yeah.
I started to feel the pull of almost being able to hear my own voice more clearly. It
Yeah.
felt like a remembering, and also the act of self-abandoning
Yeah.
became more and more intolerable.
Yeah. Exhausting.
It's
Yeah.
exhausting. And from what I hear, there's some research that shows that when our hormones start to shift around that age for women, the hormones that help us nurture children start to
Yeah.
decline. And when
Yeah.
that happens, we finally like almost like pick our head up and have the ability to take care of ourselves
Right.
and look at like what making a priority ourselves a priority might look like. And it's jarring.
Yeah.
Because then we realize like,
Jarring.
oh, I have spent a lifetime taking care of everyone else. Like
Yeah.
would it even mean for me to choose myself?
And how many times have women said that over
Oh
and over?
God.
And they're like, I hit 50 and I'm like, it's like the magical,
It's a
number.
siren song. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's due, yeah, and it absolutely is true. It's we pivot, and I think everything has to do, well, with menopause, our hormones shifting, and we lift our head
Mhm.
up for the first time, and we're like, wait a minute, and then the I'm not going to, and I'm not going to, and you see it over and over again. I'm like, I can pretty much gauge how old someone is by usually what they're tolerating
Yeah.
and how they show up. It's very unusual for someone like you to in their 30s be on the have Brené Brown on your radar enough to dive into that. I mean,
Yeah, well, I
yeah,
want to speak to that because
brilliant.
I think that this is your listeners too. And so I call us seekers. And I think that we're born that way. And
Yeah,
I think that, and who knows, there are some spiritual experts who say that there are certain souls who were born, who choose a body, doesn't matter what it is, and it's the soul that is brought here to heal generations of difficulties and
yeah,
generations of broken hearts. And I mean
yeah,
that also speaks to epigenetics.
yeah,
So I don't know if that's true or not. I think it's kind of a cool sentiment, but I do think that there are certain people who are born more. It depends on what your north node is. Mine is in Sagittarius, so that
yeah,
means that I was brought here to get a lot of knowledge and also educate, and
yeah,
also very interested in personal growth. So I would bet a lot of people listening that your North Node is also in Sagittarius. But astrology aside, I think that some people are, you can call them old souls or whatever, we're seekers. We're seekers
yeah,
of deeper meaning, which drives us to listen to podcasts like this and read books like mine.
yeah,
The sad truth is that we're often born into families where we are the only one. And we often marry people or get into long-term relationships with people, and it's not their destiny. And
yeah.
so we feel alone, we feel different, we feel weird,
Mhm.
we feel othered. And so my advice, if anyone's listening, if that's you, welcome. We saved you a seat.
Yeah.
And
I like the
also
word
it
others.
is,
When you
yeah,
feel
yeah,
othered,
people can only meet you in terms of your depth as far as they're also
yeah,
willing to go. And it's I get that question all the time. People ask me like, how do I get my significant other to like get into personal development books? How do I get my sister or my best friend to come with me to these workshops? I'm like, you can't. They
you
have to
can't.
want it too.
Yeah.
So try to find like-minded friends.
Yeah. And I notice it when we go through this work, our friends shift,
Hmm.
and we find new, I call them, what did I call them the other day? That probably shows my age. Soulful synergy. And because there was
Yeah.
just so much synergy and soulfulness, so much expansion that with lifetime friends that just are not there after 30 years anymore because we just don't have any threads left,
We don't have
the
anything in
things we
common anymore.
hung on to just are gone. And
Yeah.
you said it, you said something, and I keep looking back on it. I'm like, where did I write that down? And it said, when we lean into our rage, we
Mhm.
touch grief like a
Yeah.
candle. I it really spoke to me, you know,
Yeah.
because I think grief and rage they're of the
They're
same,
sisters.
for me, the same fiber.
Hmm.
The pendulum swings. If I'm feeling the grief and I stop feeling the grief, I'm in rage.
Yeah.
If I'm not in rage, I'm deeply in the if I allow myself to feel the grief. So
Hmm.
I know that was a quick pivot, but I thought I can't this I wrote it down and I highlighted it because I thought people need to understand that grief and rage are of the same cloth.
Hmm. Yeah, they're two sides of the same coin. And
Yeah.
the same could be said with love and grief, because if
Yeah.
you love, you are going to meet grief.
Yeah.
It's
You
sort of
said that too. That
the
was on the
price that you
backside. I wrote
pay.
that. You said that too, and I loved that
Yeah,
because
it's the
it's
price you pay.
yeah.
And the thing is rage is an interesting topic for me because, as I mentioned before, I have the type of personality where anger is was always easily accessible for me.
Yeah.
And I think it's my Enneagram type. But anyway,
Mhm.
I noticed as I started my practice, my coaching practice, is that most women don't have a great relationship with even anger, let alone rage. And
Mm.
that's from social conditioning. Nobody likes an angry woman.
Yeah.
And so we grow up understanding that all the other feelings, even though we get chastised for being too emotional, but sad is better. Like that's the one that we
Mm.
can, that we become known for. Men will handle the anger. And like,
Mm.
don't get me started on men's feelings and like what our
Yeah.
culture has done to
Yeah.
deprive them of that. But the difference between here's how I describe the difference between anger and rage is that, and I'm going to describe this very simply. Anger is when you're pissed off about something.
Mhm.
There's been like an injustice, something has pushed up against your values, or someone
Mhm.
has crossed a boundary that has made you angry.
Mhm.
Rage is a level up, it's more intense, and there's always an undulation of hurt
Yeah.
and an undulation of grief.
Right.
Because when you have to really look at the thing you're enraged about, it will cause you grief. There's something that you either need to let go of or something you need to rumble with and contend with that will cause you to touch grief, like a lit candle, as I describe it. And
Yeah.
I think that's part of the reason that we don't have great relationship with rage, also because it's linked to violence and things like that. And women tend to internalize violence, men
Yeah.
tend to externalize violence.
Yeah.
So rage is one that I like to talk about. Thanks for asking about it.
Yeah. Well, it's so scary, when people think, "Oh, you're so scary," and I'm like, "I'm so scary." I have been accused of having a lot of rage through the years, but
Yeah.
I didn't ever connect it to grief. It was years later through a lot of different modalities and healing that the grief came out of my body. Enormous
Yeah.
grief came out,
Yeah.
but rage is how it showed up, and rage is what
Yeah.
protected me. Rage was powerful. Rage um, worked well in
Kept
the
people
world,
away.
and
Yep.
in politics. I mean, everything about it just showed up as powerful, and in a man's world, it just but until it didn't.
It works until it doesn't. That's what we say.
Yeah.
It works until it doesn't.
Yeah.
And then when
Until
you
it
get to that
doesn't, then
place is where you look.
thinks you're scary. And
Yeah,
then
and like, and I don't mean it, I definitely think that it's not a healthy
yeah.
thing to direct your rage at someone, for
Yeah.
sure. But rage deserves to be processed in a healthy way. I'm a big fan
Yeah.
of rage rooms, if that
Oh
works for
yeah.
you.
Oh, I
Screaming
take
into
my clients to rage
pillows.
rooms. I love it. But we say so randomly, I'm outraged. And I'm like,
Mhm.
are you really outraged? Are you feeling rage about that? Or are you just uncomfortable with the way things are going?
Right.
Because I think there's a difference, not kind of semantics there. But I think that when you said that, and you also said love fiercely, hold loosely, that's also
That came from a
another,
ketamine session.
yeah, that's powerful. Love
That came from a ketamine
fiercely.
session
Yeah.
as my life purpose. Like we're talking about life purpose.
Yeah.
And what I equate that to is that um it is my duty, really. First of all, I am love. Like I'm made from love, and the thing that I do the best is love other people.
Yeah.
And the really the message that came through to me was that I need to continue to do that is just to love fiercely because that's what I do, but
Yeah.
also form detachments. And so, in other words, the hold loosely part means that I love fiercely, but I'm also not attached to it being reciprocated. I'm also
Right.
not attached to other people's behavior. And I'm especially not attached to that reciprocation or other people's behavior meaning anything about me. My love
Mm.
is to be released and not have any strings attached to it. And so this doesn't necessarily mean that I love unconditionally. Like, no, I still have
Right.
boundaries. You
Yeah.
can't shit on me.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
I'm
gonna
gonna
love
say it
you,
sounds
but
a
I'm
little
still
bit
gonna
different.
have boundaries.
Yeah, but I love the fact that you said I'm not attached to the outcome. It's like I'm married to this process and I've released any form of outcome that I need from you. I'm just love you, and of
Yeah.
course, yeah, it has nothing to do with boundaries,
Well,
which
don't get
I
it twisted.
yeah.
That's a work in progress. Like
Yeah, I was gonna
love
say
fiercely,
yeah.
hold loosely is
Yeah.
sort of like the North Star.
But I loved it. I
I
love
still
that
get
you said
attached.
it. Yeah, it's like, oh, I could feel that. I could feel that it probably spoke to me because it's probably something I do love fiercely, but I tend to hold on a little tighter,
Yeah,
and I thought, oh, hold loosely. What would that feel like? I always say, what would love
it's
feel like?
scary.
But how would that feel like? Yeah, a little scary
It's
because
scary.
I'm
Mhm.
trusting at a level of unknown. And what I also wrote down after that was how can we accelerate our personal growth in this arena for people that are listening, and I can hear it. I can feel them like knowing like, yes, I feel that. I feel it. How can they accelerate their personal growth knowing that this is what they might be struggling with or caring and you know how secretive people can be.
Yeah.
They're not going to say, I'm a rager, or I'm a rage driver. I'm a rage driver. I've pulled people out of their car before. I mean, it's my history. I'm not proud of it, but I've done it,
Yeah.
and it's like people that say, they need to know who you are. And I'm like, I talk about it on stage, who I am.
Hmm.
I share these stories because transformation really can happen when we deal with the grief and
Hmm.
the loss of versions of us that we might not have ever been addressed or loved. But
Yeah.
how can people accelerate at this level that might be still caring and not coping well?
I think that the thing I would leave them with is a term that is just one word that I got tattooed on my arm when my dad passed away in 2016 because I was contending with the most intense grief of my life.
Yeah.
And for some reason, the word surrender kept coming up to me for me. And I
Mm,
was like, I don't know what that is, but I know it's not really like giving up. So I thought a lot about it, got it tattooed on my arm in my own handwriting. And
mm,
since then, it's been 9 years almost since he passed away. Surrender
mm.
has been surrender and detachment, which are indirectly related, have
Yeah.
been some of the biggest life lessons that I have had to walk a spiral staircase on. And I say spiral staircase because all of personal development work is cyclical, it's not linear
Yeah.
at all. And so, my invitation to the listeners is to maybe look up the definition of surrender, play with AI, and maybe ask a specific question of like, what would surrender look like in regard to personal growth? And
Mm.
see what comes up, especially if you have a good relationship with whatever AI platform you use and it knows you, it would probably tell you some, like
Yeah.
give me 10 bullet points of what that might look like
Yeah.
in my life. And
I
it might
like
make you
that.
uncomfortable what you see. So like surrendering is like trusting that life is going to unfold however it's going to unfold. It's surrendering to your own your own emotions. It's like if you're a road
Mm.
rager, like chances are you are an intensely emotional person. And my hope is that you embrace that. My hope is
Yeah.
that you find different coping mechanisms for letting that emotion out.
Right. Well, it's so funny when you say that it's true, a deeply emotional,
Mhm.
deeply, but passionate person,
Yeah.
but always being told you're too much, you're too much.
Oh
So
yeah.
then it would always come out. Now I embrace that too muchness and it comes out
Yeah.
in different ways. And I have a lot of compassion on the road. In fact, I'm always paying it forward because the things I didn't think about before I think about now. It's a
Yeah.
different
Letting
level
people
of
in, let them
consciousness.
merge.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let him merge, let him go, let him flip me off, let him on. Be like, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
All the things. And it's real. People think, oh, I remember my daughter once saying, you just can't change like that. And I'm like, but I can. And I'm
You
sorry. I always do
can.
the Ho'oponopono, and I'm sorry that you got to witness that. And there's
Oh
shame
yeah.
with that still. I think the one thing that can provoke more shame in my life than anything would be my three daughters mirroring
Mhm.
back any form of wanting to talk about what was. And I'm
Yeah,
just like,
having to own.
can't we just like stay in the present? Can't we just go from here? But, I want to hold space and listen to that because it's important for me to do that as well. But it is a process. I think it'll be a process the rest of my life. And
It
I think
will.
your books are brilliant. I think anyone that's listening right now, any one of her books, if you just listen to the rhythm and her cadence of how she talks, her books are even better. They're better because she didn't have to like answer questions that were being
On the
led.
fly.
She just flows. She just flows. How can people find one last question before I ask how people can find what in your life? I
Mhm.
always ask this at the end of this podcast. What in your life feels like love right now?
Oh my gosh. Lots of things. I think, well, I'm in the fastest thing that came to mind is that I'm in and was not looking for it. I'm in a new relationship and it's been about 8 months. And that's not necessarily, I
Yeah.
mean, of course, like it's like new love and it's amazing. But the thing that feels like love is that both of us, given our age and given our histories, and he's also a seeker, and
Mm,
both of us are coming at this relationship with such transparency and
Sure.
accountability and honesty and ownership of the baggage that we're bringing in. I love the metaphor of, everybody brings baggage into a romantic relationship, and you have two choices. You can either unpack it together and show each other what's inside so that you
Mm.
know how to deal with it, or you can just ignore it and not say anything and then trip over it for your entire relationship. And
Mm.
we chose to unpack it. And it's like, here's my outfits. And here's how I plan on changing it. And it's like, we've
Love
already
that.
had some really hard conversations recently, even. And I am so proud of how both of us are showing up and
Mm.
repairing and owning, like when we get triggered and drop into our shadows. And that feels like love, like loving
Mm.
myself enough that I trusted my intuition on the first, second, third, fourth date with him to keep walking
Mm.
forward, and loving him to be able to be emotionally regulated enough that I can lean in when I see his triggers and
Yeah.
love all the shadow parts of him. It's a whole different experience now that, because I call myself a collector of ex-husbands. So with my collection comes lots of lessons.
Yeah. And with those lessons, those big lessons that you've gone through, it's amazing that you're open and available for love. I'm just celebrating
That
that
was a
because I think
conscious
that,
choice.
yeah.
Hmm.
Oh, I love that. Did you
Yeah,
hear that,
that was,
people? It was a conscious choice.
yeah.
She
It
chose it.
I knew that I did not ever want to give up on love, but I also knew that I was not going to attract my
Mm.
wounds in another person again.
Ah,
And I spent a year just like I called it big prize energy, where I just like dated for
yeah.
fun. And I knew I would eventually fall in love again. I thought it would be like 7 years out.
Mm.
Turns out it was faster than that. So, and again, like, I don't know,
Love it.
this relationship might end tomorrow. Like, I'm very clear. Like, it's detachment. It's
Yeah.
surrender.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I love the surrender. So how can people find you? Where do you hang out the most? What's your jam? I mean, I know we're connected on Instagram, but where do you
Probably my
direct
podcast.
people?
Yeah,
Podcast?
is my podcast is called Make Some Noise, which is the same title as my third book.
Yeah.
And that's probably the best. I'm on Instagram sometimes, but the algorithm is so bad. Like, four people
Yeah.
see my posts out of like 30,000 followers. So listen to my
Yeah.
podcast.
Yeah. Make some noise. I love the podcast, Make Some Noise. It's always like loaded. I mean, it's like the one that I listen to the most where others all lean in and out and I'm all fast forward and it's on 2x
Yeah.
but I slow it down and I really love it. It's a value, it's a great value. Anything coming up? Are you speaking anywhere? Are you
Yeah.
holding events? Are you coaching one-on-one? You got a mastermind?
I have I might have two books coming out this year for sure. I have one at the end of the year. I'm practicing self-publishing because I've traditionally published four times. So that might happen this year. I might
Ooh,
experiment with that. But yes, I have several group programs that are going to be open for registration this year. That information's on my website, andreaowen.com.
excellent. So last question, you just opened that portal. What are the benefits for people that are listening? Because you've had publishers publish your book and best-selling author. What made you lean in and say, I'm going to self-publish?
I don't like giving away 85% of the
You want to
money.
take ownership of your
Yeah,
book.
it's my work. And
Yeah.
and do I regret traditional book deals? No. I'm incredibly grateful for the distribution and the
Yeah.
reputation that that has allowed me as an author. And I also think that it's an outdated model and it's not for me
Yeah.
anymore. And so, yeah,
I love it.
authors only get 15%.
Wow.
Hmm.
I mean,
So,
you have no idea how many people I'm working with right now that are publishing books and wanting those big book deals. And they said, why did you go with a different route? And I'm like, well, if I went with and being born on Louise Hay's birthday, I always thought Hay House would publish my first book, but I wouldn't own it. It would,
nope.
this would not be any of my intellectual property.
Mm-mm.
I wouldn't make any
Yes.
money. And yes, it would be, but when you said outdated model, I had to go with that intuitive that I want to own it. I want to work with it. I want to do workshops with it.
Yep.
And it's my body of work. It's
Yeah.
my heart connected to that. And,
Yeah,
I
I've
just
gotten I've
wanted,
gotten the big book deal. It was
yeah,
one of those moments where
you have.
it was a thunk, like where it just was. I don't know. We could have a whole podcast episode on that, and it was it was a dream come true
Yeah.
on one account and also a huge disappointment on another
Mm.
account. So,
Oh, I might have to have you back. It may just be like number two, session two, because
mhm.
that right now, it is a very big ticket right now. People, books, and all the things going on with it. And so many people showing up and doing publishing now. Almost everyone's like they're self-publishing and they're
Yeah.
hanging their flag saying, I'm a publisher now. And they're self, and I'm like, wow, there's things I can feel the shift.
Yeah.
And of course, of my own decision, I made you know, I made that decision. So I think this could be I think this could be very valuable knowing that you have seen and been on both sides of the coin. I can't wait to see what you write next. I it's thank you for being here. I'm so grateful for
Oh,
you and
thank
your
you.
energy and
Same.
I'm just
I'm
glad
glad
you're in
that
the
the
world.
universe conspired to have us finally get together at the perfect time and be able to share some words
Yeah.
of wisdom with your listeners.
Absolutely. Well, I think that, not only am I grateful, I know they'll be grateful. I just can't wait to get the feedback. And until then, everybody, thank you for joining us today. And Andrea, we're going to have all her links everywhere you need to contact her, her books. And don't you have a book giveaway going on right now?
I did. It was for
Oh,
my
you did.
birthday. Yeah.
Oh, that's right. That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. And it's coming out your birthday next week.
And
The
my birthday
Aries, the
next
fire.
week.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm excited.
Happy birthday again.
Chicago.
And I'm just going to celebrate you all year. And
Thank
I can't wait
you.
to see what you do next.
Oh, thanks, Dana.
All right. Mwah. Big love for you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for joining us today at the Heart Centered Conversations of the Dana Grant Show.